Hi guys, and welcome to Biological Sciences for Year 10. This is Activity 10, where we're going to try and answer the question as in, what is DNA? Well, as we know, DNA is basically the genetic material that exists inside the nucleus of a cell. And different organisms have different amounts of DNA depending on the complexity of the characteristics which are transferred from one individual to the next. Now, the human genome, or the information that is stored in the human nucleus, was first put forward by two scientists from Cambridge University, James Watson and Francis Crick, in 1951. One was a mathematician, and basically what they did was they looked at the orientation of the molecules through a variety of different pieces of information. Now, some of that information came from Rosalind Franklin, who was working in Paris at the time, and basically they then put together the model of the DNA that we know today, which was this double-stranded, twisted molecule. And from this, Watson and Crick basically gained the Nobel Prize for Science. Now, DNA basically stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Now, the name actually relates to the type of chemicals which you've got, which actually makes it up. The deoxy bit means it's deficient in oxygen. Ribo basically is because it uses the sugar ribose, and the nucleic acid, it is a form of an acid, and the nucleic bit basically comes down to the various units which make up the DNA. Now, if we were to break down DNA from its long strand, we'd find out that there is the initial building block. Now, the building block are made up of three main molecules. Now, those molecules are a phosphate, there is a sugar, and there is a base. And we'll talk about the bases in the next activity. But basically, they're all joined together to make this one unit, which we call a nucleotide. Now, an example of a nucleotide is shown in the bottom right-hand corner, where you've got the red circle, which basically makes up the phosphate. You've got the blue sugar, and you've got the green base. So what you tend to find is the phosphates all join together and form the outside of the DNA strand. And if you think of the DNA as like a ladder, which is then twisted, then you've got the rough idea as to how the molecule works. Basically, the phosphate is the outside part of the ladder, and the rung is made up of the sugar and the base joined together. And right in the middle, you then have another strand of DNA where you've got the two bases joined together, then the sugar, then the phosphate. So let's have a look at that and see how it all pulls together. So we start off, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, with the nucleus in the cell. Now remember, the nucleus is where we find all of our information. Now that nucleus can then be broken down. So what we've done here is, this is an example of some extracted DNA from a cell. And it just comes up as white fibers. And these are lots and lots of cells where all the DNA has been mishmashed together and it's all over the place. But inside the cell itself, remember, for human beings, we have 23 pairs, or 46 chromosomes. So our nucleus basically contains the DNA. Then we've got, we can break up the DNA. So what does it look like? If we took a single strand of DNA, it would look like the Dna Helix, which is the name of the twisting, which you can see in the picture in the top left-hand corner here. You can see the different coloured sort of units in the middle of the ladder, which are basically the bases. The silver part on the outside would be as a result of the phosphate group. So if we take that molecule and expand it a wee bit more, okay, we can now see the bases joined together. And notice that you've got blue going to red, green going to yellow. You never have green going to red or green going to blue. It's always green to yellow, blue to red, or red to blue, yellow to green. So we'll talk about that later on in the next unit when we look at bases. But as we zoom in a bit further and we sort of expand it, you can see the rungs in a little bit more detail. And then those rungs will be made up of, if we look at that yellow rung that we've got, there's your nucleotide. The base being going into the center of the DNA molecule, then you've got the sugar, and then the phosphate is on the outside. So we start off in the nucleus. We can break it down into long strands of DNA. When we look at the DNA in a little bit more detail, we see that it's a double strand which is twisted, and as it's twisted, it's held together by the bases in the middle of the ladder, and the bases are made up of, or the rungs of the ladder are made up of two nucleotide groups which are joined by the bases, and the nucleotide is made up of a base with a sugar and a phosphate. So basically that's a brief overview as to what DNA is. I hope you found that useful, and join me again where we'll look at DNA in a little bit more detail. Thanks for watching.